Today on the Perception and Action podcast, is the advanced information we get from an opponent's kinematics, their body language, used to predict what's going to happen next as traditionally proposed? Or is it used as information to continuously control preparatory movements? So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about my new book. Yes, I've written a new book on skill acquisition called How We Learn to Move, a revolution in the way we coach and practice sports skills. It covers the ecological approach to skill from different angles, including practice design, the CLA, coaching, youth sports, designing technology, injury prevention, and using analytics. So I hope you will consider giving it a read. You can find the book on Amazon or by going to perceptionaction.com/book. Now on to the show. In today's episode, I want to revisit the topic of advanced cues. Do we really use them in a predictive manner? Or is there another way to think about it? Hi, everyone. This is Rob Gray from ASU and the Perception Action podcast, back with another article review. In this one, I want to look at the topic of advanced cues and consider two different ways they could be used by athletes. And we'll talk about a specific study, recent study that kind of addresses some of this. So what are we talking about, right? An advanced cue, what we mean by that is any aspect of an opponent's behavior that can be used, we're going to focus on ball sports here, that can be used to anticipate the trajectory of an upcoming pitch or upcoming ball. You know, a tennis serve, a baseball pitch, a cricket pitch. We could also talk about, football, there's all kind of different ways we can use this. The idea here is that what we're doing is picking up something, in particular, it's usually something to do with the movement kinematics of your opponent, that you can use to know what's going to happen. You can anticipate what's going to happen next, right? And we're talking about things that happened before. In the case of baseball, the study we're going to look at today is focused on baseball. We're talking about things before the pitcher releases the ball, like in this video. So in baseball, for example, the pitcher's leg kick, their arm speed, their grip, their release point, how high they release the ball above the ground, all could be used to anticipate what the pitch is going to be, where it's going to go, how fast it's going to be, etc. And there's two fundamentally different ways we think about how we use this. The classic interpretation, right, is that we use advanced cues, this kinematic information from our opponent, to make a discrete prediction about the event that's coming up, right? In baseball, we predict that's a fastball, that's a changeup, that's a curveball. In tennis, we say that serve is going cross court, that serve is going down the line. So we're making a predictive. Then we're going to use this to pre-program some movement, right? We're going to start moving left. We're going to start our swing a bit earlier, start shifting our weight a bit earlier if we predict it's a fastball, and so on, right? So we're using what is called predictive control, right? We're using a prediction about an upcoming event to parameterize a motor program to generate a movement. Right. And that's kind of the classic view of what we do with these advanced cues. And this is a model that I generated in a recent review of baseball batting, right? Showing this. So a baseball batter goes through these different phases. When they hit, they step with their front foot, they shift their weight, land. The idea here is you're using advanced cues as parameters to some predictive model, some internal model in your head, right? So you need some internal model to kind of take the information and make a prediction about what's going to happen, right? And then you start a weight shift, for example, early. If it's a fastball, if it's a curveball, you wait a little bit longer. And that's the basic idea. What evidence is there to support this, right? Well, there's long history of it, starting with the fantastic work by Bruce Abernathy looking at temporal occlusion research. So what you do is use a stimuli like the picture I showed you in the first slide. You show you occlude it. So you show the unfolding event, whether it's a baseball pitch or a tennis serve. Then you occlude it, and then you ask the person to make a discrete judgment. Left, right, serve, cross court, down the line, curveball, fastball, so on. There's other ways you can do it where you use a bit more of an active response. So you could have the person step in the anticipated direction of the serve, or if they judge it's a strike, swing. If they don't swing, right? And the general findings, so as I said, a long history of research is that relative to lesser, I'm going to focus just on baseball batting, but this has been shown in lots of different sports. More skilled batters are better at this, right? They're more accurate at judging whether a pitch is a fastball or curveball. They can also do it with less information. So if you use if you clued at an earlier point. It's also shown to be correlated with statistics from baseball, in particular minor league, and perhaps the most convincing evidence, and this has been shown in other sports too, this is work by Peter Fatty showing that when you train this ability, so you train people in this temporal occlusion task where they're watching a video and they're saying fastball, curveball, changeup, they actually show transfer to performance on the field. And this is this has been shown with some pretty good research, okay? So that seems to support this idea that people are predicting. However, I have a very different view of this, right? My hypothesis is, after looking at this and doing some of this myself for years, is that what I think is going on is that these findings that people can predict discrete outcomes like fastball, curveball, or serves down the line or not, are really kind of artifacts artifacts of the fact that elite performers are more sensitive to the information. They're attuned to the information from their opponent's body. But my key point is I don't believe they're using it to make a prediction, right? If you ask them to in your kind of artificial lab experiment where you give them a binary choice and have unlimited time to do it, then they can. But in the real sport, my hypothesis, and based on a lot of research, is that what they're doing is instead, they're not making a discrete prediction, right? This is just kind of an artifact of using this uncoupled temporal occlusion task where they have a lot of time. What they're actually doing is prospective control, right? So they're using the information from their opponent, this body language, this kinematic information, to couple some part of their movement to it, right? They're continuously controlling their movement. I'm going to show you in baseball, whether this is shifting your weight, changing your posture, right? So you're taking in the information, you're continuously using it. At no time are you predicting what a discrete outcome that's going to be a fastball. For example, I'm going to show you in a second my model for baseball that what they're using is timing their movement relative to the point the pitch is going to be released. After that, what's going to happen is they're going to switch to using information about where the ball is going to be, the time to collision from the ball flight, right? And that's kind of incorporated into the predictive control models, right? Too, you do this initial prediction and then you update that prediction as you get more information. In this one, you're coupling to one source of information, some kinematic variable from the pitcher, to time your movement, your weight shift relative to the release. Then you're going to switch to using information available in the ball flight, like tau, to couple your movement towards the ball, which includes the swing of the bat. And this is what is showing. I'm showing here in very different model, this kind of prospective control model. You're picking up information from so the key point here is that one of the reasons people think we need to anticipate, right, is because the movement is so fast, right? In baseball, the pitch is so fast, and that you can't wait for information about where the ball is going to go to become available. You can't just stand there and wait for the point of ball release, then start moving, right? It's too late. There's not enough time. There's like 200 milliseconds in some pitchers from that point, right? Or 300 or 400 maybe, so you can't just wait. So the idea is we need to start moving before we have enough information. So we got to make a prediction, a best guess. But my point is that that's true. There's no information about where the ball is actually going to go early in the pitcher, but we don't need that, right? We don't need, right from the start of the movement of a hitting action, we don't need to know exactly where the ball is going to go and where the time to collision is, because all we need to do is grossly position our body to be ready when that information does become available, right? So the information available from the pitcher's kinematics is specifying to our goal at that point, which is timing our body movement to the release point, right? There's information in the pitcher's delivery that specifies when the ball is going to be released in their kinematics, right? That's specifying for our goal at that point, right? It's not specifying for the end goal of actually hitting the ball, but we don't need that at that point, right? It's going to come later, right? So this is my different view of the point. So the idea here is that, to sum up, I think, yes, elite athletes are more sensitive to kinesthetic information from their opponent, body language, whatever you want to call it. but not because they're using it to anticipate a discrete event, make our best guess prediction about what's going to happen. It's because they've learned to couple their movements to it in perspective control. Right, so that's kind of my my hypothesis, and a lot of my batting research shows similar effects. Right, so getting to the specific study I want to talk about today. This is a study recently published in Human Movement Science by Takamido and colleagues. Right, and what they were looking at here is baseball hitting. They were looking at softball. So well, I laugh. You'll see why in a second. They were looking at softball, and they were looking at kinematic information. Okay, so what they're going to do is they're going to keep the ball flight the same. And they're going to vary the pitcher's kinematic information, and they're going to have people swing a bat with force plates and motion trackers, and they're going to measure how the hitting movement itself changes as a function of the kinematic information you're giving. So, and what they're really kind of nice part of the study is they're not just measuring discrete responses like the initiation of the swing or things like that. They're actually going to measure kinematics and kinetics, the forces and things like that. So that's a nice addition to the area. Okay. So one of the things, the key point hypothesis, they had a few other ones, but the key one for me was this one, right? So what they're arguing is they want to know how your initiation of the movement relates to the speed of the pitch, right? So the speed of the kinematic, what the kinematic information is telling you. So what they're going to do is what they actually did is going to change the playback speed of the video to simulate a slower pitch and a faster pitch, right? And think about this, right? If you're using a prediction, right, and you predict right when the pitcher starts their movement, their delivery, and you pick up information that's a slow pitch, right? You don't need to do anything, right? Because you have lots of time. You would start your pre-programmed movement later on, right? So you can wait. Whereas if you pick up kinematic information that's going to be a fastball, come to you at a higher speed once it's released, you need to start the movement right away, right? So, so what we should see is that if you're using predictive control, you'd probably expect people to start movements quicker, earlier in the delivery than relative to the point of release than when the pitch is going to be slow. Interesting, and if you think about it, you get the opposite prediction for perspective control. Perspective control, you're online coupling to the movement, right? You're not predicting whether it's going to be fast or slow. As soon as information becomes available, which allows you to control the movement of your body, in this case, weight shift, you're going to start using it and you're going to start acting. So because there's more time relative to the release point, you're going to actually start moving earlier for slow pitches, right? And then instead of fast pitches, which is kind of paradoxical, right? It was not what people think. Right, but that's one of their main predictions, and we'll see how that came out. So, and this is shown here, right? Because information is going to become available earlier relative to the time of ball release, you would expect you to start moving earlier relative to the ball release for slow pitches. Okay, which is kind of interesting. So what they did was use, so they did, as I mentioned, this is a softball. They're simulating softball hitting. They used a total of 15 male softball players, and while I was laughing, it's kind of funny and not funny, in that one of the things we lament all the time in sports science is the lack of studies with female participants. Right? There's so many bulk of studies have male participants in it. If for those that don't know, right, particularly in America, right, men tend to play baseball, women tend to play softball, right? Doesn't mean that they can't go across into the other one, but there's so many female softball players out there. Why they chose to use males is a bit, it's obviously a different country and stuff, but it was interesting. Maybe they don't know. When I read that, I was like, oh, you missed the opportunity. But anyway, they were all experienced, right? Some of them played college. They were quite experienced hitters. What they did to create the stimuli was they recorded a softball pitcher, and it was a female, which good point, and doing one delivery. Okay, they were doing one delivery. They recorded with a video camera, 60 hertz. What they did was altered the playback speed, so they had the same pitch, and altered the playback speed to control for advanced cues. Right, so what they would do is speed it up to simulate a faster pitch, slow it down to simulate a lower pitch. And there's kind of some of the differences in timing. Okay. For me, there's a couple problems here, right? With someone who's been generating this kind of stimuli for all their career. One is the frame rate, right? 60 times hertz frame rate. So you're sampling at 60 times a second. Baseball almost travels to a pitch that's 70 miles an hour, which is reasonable for a softball, travels almost 2 feet in that time. So there's going to be a very discrete information. So you're not getting the full dynamic information that's available from the actual delivery, right? But that's something a lot of experiments have to suffer with. The more serious one for me, though, is that if you're just when I do a slow pitch, and so if I do a slow pitch as a pitcher in softball, and then I do a fast pitch on the next one, there's more differences between those two than just everything moves faster in the second one, right? It's not the case that throwing faster is just everything sped up, right? It's a different task, right? Throwing a baseball pitcher throwing at a higher velocity is a different task than throwing at a slower velocity. You get different coordination patterns. So by just speeding it up, I think you're missing a lot of the information that would really be there, right? When a pitcher throws hard, there's going to be other kinematic information available due to the fact they have to organize their movement differently, not just speed everything up. Okay, so I think that's so it's not really truly representative kinematic advanced information. Okay, here's showing the example, right? So the pitcher starting here, I don't know if he is winding up, throwing, and there's the ball showing, so what the person is doing is watching this video unfold, right? And playing back at different speeds. Their task was a mock hitting task, right? So they watch this video. Obviously, the ball, it's not VR, so the ball doesn't come out of the screen. It just stops at the end of the video with the ball. They're doing a swing at this, trying to swing at this ball, and they have to kind of imagine that it kept moving and swing at it. So they have no information from the ball flight itself, obviously. They get verbal feedback and bandwidth feedback. So if the swing was longer than, if the accurate time is 500 milliseconds when you should be swinging, if it's longer than 533, the experimenter said too late to you. If it's shorter than 467 milliseconds, they said too early, right? So very kind of this kind of bandwidth feedback. So a very kind of crude task, obviously, and not all the information is here. So, there's a bit of issues with that too, but let's accept this, okay? What did they find? The biggest finding for me was the one related to that hypothesis I talked about earlier, right? There's a significant difference in movement timing, in particular when the person starts lifting their front foot off the ground and shifting their weight based on the playback speed. And consistent with prospective control, people in the study started moving earlier relative to the ball release in the slow condition than in the fast condition, right? Again, think about that. When the pitch is slower, why would you move earlier, right? You don't need to move earlier, right? You have more time, right? If you're using a pre-programmed swing, why would you start it earlier on a slow pitch, right? You would do the opposite, right? You would start earlier when you have less time. There's going to be less time available after the ball is released. The reason you do is because for a slow pitch, the information is becoming available earlier to couple your movement to, right? That's how I would interpret that, right? They also found these really interesting kinetic differences. In particular, what they found, they had a very sensitive force measurement. They could measure the weight on the different toes, the one facing the pitcher and the little toe by the catcher. And what they found was the relative weighting on the different toes changed with the kinematic information as well, right? So it's really kind of fascinating. And I'm going to point out what I think of that as well, okay? So overall, their conclusion was that when you change this advanced information, it changes how people organize their swing. They're taking in information. What they argue, and this is a direct quote from the paper, in particular, the preparatory movement pattern is adjusted by coupling the hitting movement with the advanced kinematic information of the opponent pitcher, right? So consistent with what I'm talking about, not predicting and doing a discrete movement, coupling, perspective control, right? So overall, although this study has some issues in terms of the stimuli and the design, I think it's a really interesting one. I think it's consistent with my hypothesis that if you train an athlete the right way, they can use Advanced. So I'm not denying here that all the research by Abernathy and colleagues showing how important advanced cues and kinesthetic information from an opponent is, right? That's wonderful work, demonstrate, and that training your ability to pick it up and to educate your attention to it might be beneficial. What I'm arguing here is we're using it for a different way than we've all thought all along, right? We're not using it in a predictive way. We're using it to couple our movement to. And I think if we focus on developing that, we're getting a much more rich control of the movement than if we force people to use it in this binary fastball changeup, right? We're using it in this continuous controlled way. We can have much more. It's much more information there. There's much more different ways we can use it and so on. And I think this really, the kind of toes, the weight on the different toes really shows to me, we're using information. We can couple our movements to information before the event starts, right? But oftentimes it's going to be very, very subtle because it's just crude kind of body positioning like that, right? That's all we need to do at that point. And that's a point I made earlier. There's information in the pitcher's delivery that's specifying for what we need at that point. Get our body prepared to make a swing the bat. It's not specifying for the complete end goal, right? I think we kind of confuse that sometimes. And that's the reason we think we need anticipations or predictions, because we're assuming that we're trying to achieve the end goal right from the start, right? This is a case I would call it kind of nested affordances, right? Our initial affordances in hitting is getting our body in position to swing, right? And then swing, right? So I think there's this, we can think about it in these kind of different ways. And this is all consistent with, kind of the research I did a couple of years ago, looking at kind of the timing of these things and how skilled batters adjust this timing based on kind of online, but using information, right? And so I think, again, we need to start thinking about anticipation, advanced cues. Also, we can bring in situational probabilities and things like that. I'll do one of those later in a very different light in terms of prospective online control instead of predictive model-based control. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at Shakewaits. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including written transcripts and a monthly meetup, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled.